do you have something there about freedom of speech, freedom of religion on there?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's basically your First Amendment rights. You got the freedom to assemble, the freedom to practice your own religion without interference from the government. The government is not supposed to support a particular religion, you know. And one of the other one was petition to redress grievances. If you've got a problem with your government, you're supposed to be able to come to your government and complain, but your government is supposed to listen and respond to you. But that's what Bob Schultz has been running into. For 15 years, he's been petitioning the government, and the courts just throw it back at him and say, you have no standing. So, okay, maybe you've been damaged, but you're not being damaged more than anybody else. So, I mean, it's a real frustration when you keep, it's like asking mom and dad for something, and you keep complaining, and they just totally ignore you. There's sooner or later, you might have a rebellion on your hands, you know.
Now, how about, I know one of the violations you had there was on the debt. Can you expound on that a little bit?
Well, originally, Congress is the one that was supposed to authorize the coinage of money, you know, which is supposed to have been gold and silver. So that was a real hard currency. It had value. You had a limited supply of it. Inflation was in check. And then all of a sudden, they started printing fiat currency, which is not backed by anything. It's just whatever anybody says it is. And now they're just like cranking up the printing presses, you know. They're not actually
we've seen our government in the last couple of years, you know, really printing a lot of money, and it's about worth nothing, you know. And of course, if a lot of people, I'm sure a lot of people know, or maybe do not know, that we went off the gold standard during Franklin Roosevelt's administration, correct?
Yeah, that was 1933, and that's another thing. We've been under emergency since 1933. You know, like we have an economic crisis now, they had an economic crisis back then, and they declared this emergency, so it's like one step short of martial law. You know, and we've been under continuous emergency ever since.
What was Roosevelt's thinking to get us off the gold standard, do you know?
Well, I believe that the whole thing had to do with the Federal Reserve. We borrowed money from the Federal Reserve in 1913, and then we had the economic collapse in the late 20s and the early 30s, and we owed them money. So I seriously believe they called all the gold in to pay the debt to the Federal Reserve.
Well, of course, right now, in a current situation, is we have all this debt, and China owns a lot of the debt that, you know.
Yeah, they're buying our
and it just fathoms my mind. Our government, you know, it's like how much longer as we as a country keep on going in debt and you know, putting this our future, our children and our grandchildren's future at stake. And it's like, how much longer can we continue to spend and not be serious about getting control of the spending? And I think, like all the protests that have been happening with the Tea Party and all this going around the nation, they're really upset about the spending. Not so much Barack Obama as a person, or maybe so much of his policies, but the spending, I believe, is
both parties are guilty of this.
Yeah, well, yeah, the Republicans were guilty of that.
I mean, it's a Ponzi
I can admit
scam.
that. You know,
Ponzi scam. It's just going to keep building and building until we were going to have, you know, what happened to the Germany back in the 1920s. It just all of a sudden they hit this point where the inflation takes off and they can't control it.
If the government goes broke, I mean, what do we do as a country? I mean, good night. What?
Well, as I see it now,
it just seems like, you know, the debt. It just seems like nobody in Washington wants to talk about that.
No,
you know, they just kind of.
Oh, hey, your grandkids will take care of it. You know, I mean, it's just like running your household that same way. You know,
I talked to a buddy of mine who's a Democrat, lives out in Florida, and he was saying the same thing. Bob, he says, you just don't understand. He says, it's like nobody on either side wants to talk about the debt, you know, and what's happening. You know, they just act like it doesn't exist, or they're living in Never Land, you know. I
mean, I see that possibility that they're going to close the banks, they're going to recall the United States currency, and we're going to have a new world order, like a euro or something. You know, it's scary. It's very scary.
I don't know. It just makes you, you know, wonder what our future is out there. You know, if we continue to go on as we are, you know.
No, you can't do that in your household. You can run up your credit cards too high. You're going to be spending all your budget just paying interest on debt, and it makes your standard of living go down. And
see, that's another thing. You know, we as citizens, you know, we've got so caught up on the credit card thing, and boy, I tell you, a lot of people are in debt.
Well, they make it easy. Like, oh yeah, just 1% interest. Oh, pay it back in 3 years.
It was like when I went to college, it was sure easy to borrow all these national direct student loans, but boy, it was sure hard trying to pay them off, if you know what I mean. It took a long.
That's one thing you talked about healthcare before we started the show, and a lot of people aren't going to become doctors anymore because why should they spend $100 grand and run up all this debt and they can never pay it back because the government's going to say this is what you're going to receive for payments and it's not enough to cover your debts. You know?
You talk about violation of the Constitution. I know, that 11 or 14 state attorney generals and governors, have appealed the health care reform bill that was passed, saying it's unconstitutional. Where do you think that is going to fall under for the argument to repeal this when it comes to the violation of the Constitution? Would it be under, the federal government opposing, citizens of the United States to buy something, and does the federal government actually have the right to do that?
Well, I don't believe they do. When they get to the Constitution, the General Welfare Clause was supposed to be like the common defense, against outside invasion. And it wasn't supposed to take care of the citizens from cradle to grave.
Right.
We're going down a slippery slope of socialism. And then if the government's going to start buying up all our industries, then you're going to start getting into fascism. And next thing you know, they're going to own all the industries and there'll be communism. So it's scary. But as far as, that goes back to your sovereignty, that originally you were a citizen of your state and you weren't a citizen of the United States. Mm-hmm. So that you worked your problems out within your state. You didn't rely on the federal government for much of anything. And now they got the government giving you all these entitlements, and then of course to pay for the entitlements they got to put a gun in your face to pay taxes. So that's one of the things about the Articles of Freedom. We're talking about civic actions and withholding financial support from the federal government. Now I'm not telling people to break the law, but there are ways that you can, instead of putting your money in a U.S. bank, put your money in a local community credit union or something like that. So the Federal Reserve is not using your money.